The riverbank encounter. The golden hues of sunset bathed the small town of Clearwater, California, in a warm glow. The River Bend Bridge, an old stone relic from the early 1900s, stood as a tranquil symbol of the town's history. Its weathered arches stretched over the gently flowing waters of Clearwater River, a favorite spot for quiet reflections and secret moments. 9-year-old Benji Carter often found solace here. Armed with his sketchpad and a handful of colored pencils, he would lose himself in the world of imagination. That evening, he perched on his favorite rock near the riverbank, the soft rustle of reeds shielding him from the world above. The day had been uneventful at school, but Benji didn't mind. The river was his sanctuary. As he sketched the bridge's elegant arches, his attention was drawn to a conversation above. Two figures stood on the bridge's edge. Their voices, low at first, began to rise. Benji squinted, his small frame huddled behind the tall grass, curiosity sparking in his chest. One of the figures, a man in his 60s, leaned heavily against the bridge railing. His tailored coat and polished shoes hinted at a life of wealth and influence, but his hunched posture betrayed weariness. His name was Samuel Prescott, a prominent figure in the town, known for his charitable acts, but whispered about for his stern demeanor and unrelenting arrogance. Beside him stood a woman in her late 30s, elegant yet tense. Her auburn hair was tied neatly back, and her tailored coat mirrored Samuel's sophistication. Her name was Clara, one of Samuel's closest associates, or so it seemed to outsiders. She nodded as Samuel spoke, but her body language told a different story. Her shoulders were rigid, her hands clutching her bag tightly. Benji couldn't make out every word, but the tone of the conversation grew sharper with each passing moment. Samuel's voice carried authority, but it was tinged with frustration. "You think I don't know, Clara. The discrepancies, the lies. You've been siphoning funds from my projects. Did you really think I wouldn't notice?" Clara's lips pressed into a thin line. Her reply, calm yet icy, sent a chill down Benji's spine. "You've always believed you're untouchable, Samuel. Your money, your reputation. It doesn't make you invincible. Maybe it's time someone showed you." Samuel stepped closer, his tone dropping, but losing none of its edge. "Is that a threat? You've betrayed my trust, Clara. Do you know what happens to people who cross me?" Clara's grip on her bag tightened, her knuckles white. "Trust," she spat, her voice rising. "You don't trust anyone. You control, manipulate, and crush anyone who dares defy you." The river flowed on, indifferent to the storm brewing above. Benji's heart pounded in his chest. He wasn't supposed to be there. This was adult business, a world far removed from his own. But something about the scene rooted him to the spot. The anger in their voices, the tension in their movements. It felt like a coiled spring about to snap. Samuel's expression shifted. A flicker of doubt crossed his face as he reached out, his voice softening. "Clara, let's not do something we'll both regret. We can fix this." But Clara didn't respond. Instead, she took a step back, her face hardening into an unreadable mask. Then, in a single, swift motion, she lunged forward, her hands pressed against Samuel's chest, shoving him over the railing. The world seemed to freeze. Samuel's cry of shock was brief, swallowed by the rush of water below. The river's current, gentle moments before, now seemed menacing, pulling him under as he flailed for air. Clara stood motionless, her hands still raised as if she couldn't believe what she'd done. Then, with a deep breath, she adjusted her coat, turned on her heel, and walked away. Her footsteps echoed against the stone bridge, fading into the distance. Benji sat frozen behind the reeds, his small hands trembling. His wide eyes stared at the rippling surface of the water, where Samuel's head bobbed weakly before disappearing beneath the waves. The scene played over and over in his mind. She pushed him. She really pushed him. For a moment, Benji considered running. What could a 9-year-old do? He was just a kid after all. But then he thought of his dad, who always said, "Being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means doing the right thing, even when you are. Benji's fear was replaced by a surge of determination. He scrambled to his feet, scanning the river for any sign of Samuel. The man resurfaced briefly, his arms flailing weakly against the current. "Hey!" Benji shouted, his voice cracking with urgency. "Hold on." The river was deeper and faster than it looked. Benji knew he couldn't jump in, not without being swept away himself. He searched frantically for something to help. His eyes landed on a long branch lodged in the muddy bank. He rushed over, yanking it free with all his strength. "Grab this," he yelled, wading into the icy water. The cold bit at his legs, but he ignored it, focusing on the man drifting further away. "You have to grab it." Samuel's hand broke the surface, reaching for the branch. He missed once, twice, but on the third try, his fingers latched onto the wood. Benji dug his heels into the slippery bank, using every ounce of strength to pull the man closer. "You're almost there," Benji shouted, his voice strained. The current fought back, dragging both of them toward the deeper part of the river. Benji's arms burned, his legs shaking from the effort. But he didn't let go. Slowly, inch by inch, he pulled Samuel toward the shore. When Samuel's body finally reached the shallows, Benji collapsed onto the bank, gasping for air. The man lay beside him, his face pale and lips blue, but he was alive. "Stay awake," Benji panted, shaking Samuel's shoulder. "Help is coming." As if on cue, the distant wail of sirens echoed through the trees. Relief washed over Benji, but his mind was still racing. The woman, Clara, had walked away as if nothing had happened. Would she get away with it? As the paramedics and police arrived, Benji's small frame was dwarfed by the chaotic scene. He gave his account, his voice trembling but clear. "She pushed him," he told the officer, his eyes filled with determination. "I saw her do it." The officer crouched to meet his gaze. "Can you describe her?" Benji nodded, recalling every detail. The auburn hair, the coat, the calm way she walked away. The officer's face hardened as he jotted down notes. As the ambulance doors closed behind Samuel and the flashing lights disappeared into the night, Benji stood quietly by the riverbank. His body was exhausted, but his mind was resolute. He had done the right thing. But the story was far from over. Secrets unveiled. The small town of Clearwater buzzed with whispers the next morning. News of Samuel Prescott's near-death experience on the Riverbend Bridge spread like wildfire, accompanied by the astonishing detail of a young boy's heroic rescue. Local reporters were already knocking on doors, and the town square became a hub of speculation. But for Benji Carter, the day was anything but ordinary. As he walked into Clearwater Elementary, a mix of pride and unease settled over him. His classmates surrounded him, showering him with admiration. "You're a hero, Benji," one boy exclaimed, clapping him on the back. "I can't believe you saved Mr. Prescott," a girl added, her eyes wide. Benji forced a smile, but his mind was elsewhere. The memory of Clara's cold demeanor as she walked away haunted him. She had pushed Samuel, and yet the world outside didn't seem to know. The police had promised to investigate, but would they find her? At lunch, Benji sat with his best friend, Jonah, who leaned in conspiratorially. "So what really happened? Did you see the person who pushed him?" Benji hesitated, glancing around to ensure no one else was listening. "Yeah," he whispered. "It was a woman. She just walked away." Jonah's eyes widened. "That's crazy. Did the cops believe you?" "I think so," Benji said, his voice uncertain. "But what if they don't find her? What if she gets away?" Jonah thought for a moment before replying. "Maybe you should tell someone else, like your mom or even a reporter. If more people know, they'll have to take it seriously." That evening, Benji returned home to find his mother, Lisa, sitting on the couch with the evening news playing softly in the background. She looked up as he entered, her expression a mix of relief and pride. "How was school, sweetheart?" she asked, pulling him into a tight hug. Benji shrugged, sitting beside her. Okay, I guess. Everyone's talking about what happened. Lisa nodded, brushing a strand of hair from his face. Of course they are. What you did was amazing. You saved a life, Benji. He bit his lip, struggling to find the words to express his worry. Finally, he said, Mom, what if the person who pushed Mr. Prescott gets away? What if they never find her? Lisa's brow furrowed. The police are working on it, honey. You gave them a good description, right? Yeah. But what if that's not enough? Benji asked, his voice trembling. Lisa pulled him closer. Sometimes doing the right thing means waiting and trusting the process. You've already done so much, Benji. You were brave when it mattered most. Her words comforted him, but the unease lingered. That night, as he lay in bed, he replayed the scene on the bridge over and over. Clara's face, her cold stare, and Samuel's helpless flailing in the water. It all felt too vivid to forget. Meanwhile, across town, Clara paced nervously in her small hotel room. The once polished exterior she wore so confidently was now cracked, revealing a woman consumed by fear and desperation. She had been careful, planning her every move to ensure no one would suspect her. But the boy, she hadn't seen him hiding by the riverbank. Clara cursed under her breath, wringing her hands. The news report earlier had mentioned Samuel's survival, but it hadn't included any details about a witness. She clung to the hope that the boy hadn't seen her clearly. A knock at the door startled her, and she froze. Heart pounding, she moved cautiously toward the peephole. Relief washed over her when she saw a familiar face, Jason, an old acquaintance and a lawyer she had called in desperation. Clara opened the door, letting him in quickly. Jason, thank you for coming. Jason stepped inside, his sharp suit a stark contrast to Clara's disheveled appearance. You sounded panicked on the phone. What's going on? Clara hesitated, then blurted out, It's Samuel. I pushed him. He knows too much. Jason's face darkened. You what? Clara, do you have any idea what you've done? I didn't have a choice. She snapped, her voice cracking. He was going to ruin me. All those years I worked for him, and he threatened to destroy everything I built. Jason ran a hand through his hair, pacing. This is bad, Clara. Really bad. If someone saw you... She cut him off. There was a boy, a kid by the river, but he's just a child. He couldn't have seen much. Jason's expression grew graver. Kids notice more than you think. If he talks to the police... Clara slammed her hand against the table, startling him. I can't let that happen. You need to fix this, Jason. You're my lawyer. Make it go away. Jason shook his head, his voice firm. I can't undo what's already done, Clara. But if the police haven't come for you yet, it means they're still gathering evidence. You need to stay out of sight and avoid drawing attention. Clara clenched her fists, frustration bubbling to the surface. I can't just sit here and wait. What if they find me? Jason sighed, his tone softening. Then you need a plan. Lay low, cooperate if they come, and hope for the best. But Clara wasn't the kind of person to leave her fate to chance. As Jason left, she began formulating her own plan, one that didn't involve waiting passively for the authorities to catch up. The next morning, Benji woke to the sound of his mother's voice calling him downstairs. Rubbing the sleep from his eyes, he made his way to the kitchen, where Lisa stood holding her phone, her expression unreadable. What's wrong, Mom? He asked. She handed him the phone. It's the officer from the other night. He wants to talk to you. Benji took the phone hesitantly. Hello. The officer's voice was calm but urgent. Benji, we've made some progress in the investigation. Your description of the woman was very helpful. We believe we know who she is. Benji's heart raced. Did you find her? Not yet, the officer admitted. But we're close. We need you to be ready to come down to the station if we have more questions. Benji nodded, his grip tightening on the phone. Okay, I'll help however I can. As he hung up, a new wave of determination washed over him. Clara might have walked away from the bridge that night, but Benji was sure of one thing: justice would find her. The shadows close in. The sun broke through the morning fog, casting a pale light over Clearwater. Despite the calm appearance of the town, the tension surrounding Samuel Prescott's near-death experience was palpable. Whispers circulated in every corner, from the coffee shops to the grocery stores. People speculated about what had really happened on the bridge that night. Most were in awe of Benji Carter's bravery, but a few began to question the strange circumstances surrounding the incident. Benji, however, felt the pressure mounting. His mother tried to shield him from the growing attention, but he couldn't escape it entirely. Reporters showed up outside their house, asking him to recount his story for the 100th time. Neighbors stopped him on the street, eager to hear more details. Yet for Benji, the real story was far from over. Clara's desperation. Across town, in a dimly lit motel room on the outskirts, Clara sat hunched over a small desk. Her once pristine appearance had given way to dark circles under her eyes and a permanent scowl etched on her face. A stack of papers lay in front of her, a mix of old receipts, financial ledgers, and Samuel's handwritten notes. She scanned the documents, her fingers trembling as she pieced together the evidence she knew Samuel had been gathering against her. For years, Clara had managed to siphon small amounts of money from Samuel's charity projects, redirecting them into shell accounts she controlled. It wasn't greed that drove her, it was desperation. She had grown tired of being under Samuel's thumb, of enduring his controlling behavior and constant reminders of his so-called generosity. She glanced at the motel window, where the curtains were drawn tight. Every sound outside made her flinch. Every shadow sent her heart racing. She knew the police were closing in. The boy, Benji, was a problem. Clara had underestimated him, and now her every move felt like a gamble. Her phone buzzed on the desk. Jason's name appeared on the screen. With a deep breath, she answered. "You're running out of time, Clara," Jason said bluntly. "The police have your description. It's only a matter of days before they find you." Clara clenched her jaw. "I'm not going to let them take me down without a fight." Jason sighed. "Listen to me. If you keep running, you'll only make things worse. Your best bet is to turn yourself in and try to negotiate." But Clara wasn't listening. Her mind raced with possibilities. There had to be a way out, a way to silence the boy, erase the evidence, and disappear before the authorities could catch her. She hung up without another word, leaving Jason frustrated on the other end. Benji's unease. Back at home, Benji sat on the porch steps, watching the street with a heavy heart. The police had promised they were close to finding Clara, but days had passed, and he hadn't heard anything new. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, that Clara wasn't going to wait quietly to be caught. His best friend Jonah biked up the driveway, skidding to a stop in front of him. "Benji, you've got to see this," Jonah said, pulling his phone from his pocket. "What is it?" Benji asked, standing up. Jonah showed him a news article on the screen. The headline read, "Woman suspected in Samuel Prescott case still at large." Below it was a blurry surveillance photo of Clara, her auburn hair tied back, walking into a motel. "That's her," Benji whispered, his stomach tightening. "That's the woman from the bridge." Jonah nodded. "The article says they think she's hiding in town. Do you think she knows they're onto her?" Benji swallowed hard. "If she does, she might try to run. Or worse." "Worse?" Jonah asked, his voice dropping. "What do you mean?" Benji hesitated. "I don't know, but she doesn't seem like the kind of person who gives up." Jonah frowned. "Do you think she'd come after you?" The question sent a chill down Benji's spine. He hadn't considered the possibility before, but now it felt all too real. Clara knew he had seen her. If she was desperate enough to push Samuel off the bridge, what else might she do to protect herself? A quiet resolve. That night, Benji lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. He thought about Samuel, still recovering in the hospital, and about Clara, out there somewhere, plotting her next move. He felt small, like a kid in a world far too big and dangerous for him. But he also felt something else, a quiet resolve. His dad's words echoed in his mind. Being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means doing the right thing, even when you are. The next morning, Benji decided to take action. He grabbed his sketchpad and a pencil, sitting by the kitchen table while his mom bustled around getting ready for work. He began to draw Clara from memory, focusing on every detail he could recall. Her auburn hair, the sharp angles of her face, the coat she had worn that night. His mom noticed and paused, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "What are you working on, sweetheart?" "I'm drawing her," Benji said quietly. "The woman from the bridge. I thought maybe it could help the police." Lisa knelt beside him, her eyes welling with tears of pride and concern. "That's very brave of you, Benji. But you've already done so much. You don't have to carry this all by yourself." Benji shook his head. "If I don't, who will? She can't just get away with it." Lisa hugged him tightly. "Okay, we'll take it to the police station after school, all right?" Benji nodded, feeling a small flicker of hope. Maybe this would make a difference. Clara's next move. At the same time, Clara was packing a small bag in her motel room, her movements quick and frantic. She had seen the news report about the police tracking her down, and she knew her time was running out. Her car was parked behind the motel, hidden from view, and she planned to leave before dawn, driving as far as she could before anyone noticed. But as she zipped her bag closed, a thought gnawed at her. The boy, Benji, was still out there. He was the one thread that could unravel everything. If she didn't deal with him, her plan would never work. Clara hesitated, staring at her reflection in the cracked motel mirror. She had already crossed one line she never thought she would. Was she willing to cross another? Her hands trembled as she picked up her phone and searched for Benji's name online. A few minutes later, she found it. A photo of him standing proudly in front of Clearwater Elementary, a big grin on his face. Beneath it was the school's address. Her grip tightened on the phone. She had a plan now. A dangerous, desperate plan, but one she believed would silence the boy once and for all. She grabbed her bag, took a deep breath, and headed out into the night. The shadows seemed to close in around her, as if the world itself was holding its breath for what was to come. The predator in the shadows. The town of Clearwater woke to a crisp, bright morning, the sun casting long shadows over the quiet streets. It seemed like any other day to the locals, but for 9-year-old Benji Carter, the unease from the previous night lingered like a storm cloud. Despite his mother's reassurances, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen. After breakfast, Lisa Carter drove Benji to school. The drawing of Clara he had made sat neatly folded in her purse, ready to be handed over to the police after drop-off. She glanced at her son through the rearview mirror, his small face tense with worry. "You've done everything you can, Benji," she said softly. "The police will use your drawing to find her. I promise." Benji nodded but remained silent. Deep down, he felt a gnawing sense of responsibility. He wasn't just a witness anymore. He was part of this now. And until Clara was caught, he wouldn't feel safe. Clara's desperate gamble. Across town, Clara sat in her car, parked a block away from Clearwater Elementary. She had spent the early morning hours in a haze of fear and determination, the adrenaline driving her to this point. The sight of the school's red brick building made her stomach churn, but she didn't waver. She had convinced herself that this was the only way out. She watched the children streaming into the schoolyard, their backpacks bouncing as they ran. Among them, she spotted Benji. Her heart pounded as she saw him pause by the swings, talking to a friend. He looked so small, so innocent, but he was the one thread that could unravel her carefully constructed facade. Clara's grip on the steering wheel tightened. She couldn't afford to let him speak again. Not to the police, not to anyone. A school day like no other. Benji's morning passed uneventfully, though he found it hard to focus in class. His teacher, Mrs. Kirkland, noticed his distraction and gently placed a hand on his shoulder during math. "Benji, are you feeling all right?" she asked, her voice full of concern. He nodded quickly, not wanting to draw attention. "I'm fine." But he wasn't fine. His eyes kept darting to the windows, his mind replaying the moment on the bridge over and over. He didn't understand why he felt so anxious. Clara was out there, sure, but the police were looking for her. What could she do? By lunchtime, the unease had grown unbearable. Benji sat with his best friend Jonah under their usual tree, poking at his peanut butter sandwich. "Hey," Jonah said, nudging him. "You're acting weird today. What's wrong?" Benji sighed. "I don't know. I just feel like something bad is going to happen." Jonah frowned, his usual carefree demeanor replaced by concern. "You think it's about her? The woman from the bridge?" Benji nodded. "Yeah. What if she's close? What if she's watching me?" Jonah looked around the schoolyard, his gaze lingering on the parked cars by the street. "You think she'd come here?" "I don't know," Benji whispered, his voice barely audible. "But I can't stop thinking about it." Clara makes her move. From her vantage point, Clara watched the children scatter across the playground during lunch. She spotted Benji under the tree, talking to his friend. Her pulse quickened. This was her chance. Pulling her hood low over her face, Clara stepped out of the car and crossed the street, blending into the group of parents waiting by the school gates. She had rehearsed this in her mind. What she would say, how she would act. All she needed was to get close enough to Benji to pull him away from the crowd. She approached a teacher monitoring the playground, flashing a warm smile. "Hi, I'm Benji Carter's aunt. His mom asked me to pick him up early today." The teacher hesitated, her brow furrowing. "I wasn't told about an early pickup." Clara kept her tone light, masking the fear bubbling beneath the surface. "Oh, it was last minute. She had an appointment and asked me to take him. I can call her if you need confirmation." The teacher looked skeptical, but nodded. "Please do." Clara fumbled with her phone, pretending to make a call. As she held the phone to her ear, her eyes darted toward Benji, who was still under the tree. Her mind raced. She couldn't risk waiting too long. "I think she's busy at the moment," Clara said, feigning frustration. "But I assure you it's fine." The teacher crossed her arms. "I'm sorry, but I can't release him without proper notice." Clara forced a tight smile, nodding politely. "Of course. I'll sort it out. Thank you." She turned away, frustration boiling inside her. Her plan wasn't going as smoothly as she had hoped, but she wasn't giving up. Not yet. Benji's instincts kick in. As the lunch period ended, Benji's unease grew stronger. He glanced toward the school gates, his stomach dropping when he saw a figure in a hooded jacket lingering near the teacher. Something about the way the person stood, half-turned toward the playground, sent a chill down his spine. "Jonah," Benji whispered, tugging on his friend's sleeve. "Do you see that person by the gate?" Jonah squinted. "Yeah. Looks like a parent or something." "No," Benji said, his voice shaking. "I think it's her." Jonah's eyes widened. "The woman? Are you sure?" "I don't know," Benji admitted, his heart racing. "But I don't feel good about it." Before he could say anything else, the bell rang, signaling the end of lunch. The kids began filing back into the school, and Benji stuck close to Jonah, his eyes darting toward the gate. The hooded figure was gone. Clara's second attempt. Frustrated but undeterred, Clara moved to Plan B. She circled the school grounds, scanning for another way in. Finally, she spotted an open gate leading to the back of the playground. She slipped inside, her hood still pulled low, and made her way toward the main building. Inside, Benji sat at his desk, his unease reaching a fever pitch. He couldn't explain it, but he felt like he needed to get out of the classroom. He raised his hand. "Mrs. Kirkland, can I go to the bathroom?" he asked, his voice trembling slightly. Mrs. Kirkland nodded. "Go ahead, Benji." Be quick." Benji hurried out, his heart pounding. As he stepped into the hallway, he froze. At the far end, a hooded figure was walking toward him. It was her, Clara. Her eyes locked on his, and for a moment, neither of them moved. Then Clara smiled, a slow, calculated smile that sent Benji's stomach plummeting. "Hello, Benji," she said, her voice calm but with an edge that made his skin crawl. "We need to talk." Benji didn't reply. He turned on his heel and ran, his small feet pounding against the tiled floor. He didn't look back, but he could hear her footsteps behind him, quick and determined. A desperate chase. Benji's mind raced as he darted through the hallways, searching for a teacher or a safe place to hide. Clara was closing in, her footsteps growing louder. He turned a corner and spotted the principal's office up ahead. Without thinking, he bolted inside, slamming the door behind him. The secretary looked up in surprise. "Benji, what's wrong?" "There's someone here," Benji gasped, his chest heaving. "She's after me." The secretary stood quickly, her face pale. "Stay here. I'll get the principal." Moments later, the principal appeared, her expression serious. Benji quickly explained what had happened, his words tumbling over each other in a rush. The principal called the police immediately, her calm demeanor masking the growing tension in the room. Outside, Clara realized her plan had failed. Sirens echoed faintly in the distance, and she knew she was out of time. She slipped out of the school the same way she had entered, her heart pounding. But as she disappeared into the surrounding neighborhood, one thought consumed her. This wasn't over. A town on edge. The sirens grew louder as police cars swarmed the streets around Clearwater Elementary. Inside the principal's office, Benji sat on a cushioned chair, clutching a cup of water with trembling hands. His mother, Lisa, had arrived moments earlier, kneeling beside him with worry etched across her face. "You're safe now," she whispered, her hand smoothing his hair. "The police are here." But Benji didn't feel safe. The image of Clara's hooded figure, her cold smile as she called his name, played on repeat in his mind. She had been so close, too close. The police investigation intensifies. Detective Elena Morales, a no-nonsense investigator with sharp eyes and an air of quiet authority, arrived at the scene. She knelt to Benji's level, offering him a kind smile. "Hi, Benji. I'm Detective Morales," she said softly. "I need your help, okay? Can you tell me what happened?" Benji nodded, his voice shaking as he recounted the events. She was in the hallway. She said she wanted to talk, but I knew she wasn't here for that. I ran as fast as I could." Detective Morales took notes, her brow furrowing. "You did exactly the right thing, Benji. You were very brave." Benji glanced at his mom, who gave him an encouraging nod. "She's not going to stop, is she?" he asked quietly. Morales' expression softened, but she didn't sugarcoat the truth. "We're doing everything we can to catch her. Your description and the information you've given us have been crucial. We've put out an alert to all units in the area." Lisa chimed in, her voice firm. "We're not taking any chances. Benji's coming home with me, and I'm not letting him out of my sight." Morales nodded. "That's a good idea. We'll have an officer stationed outside your house tonight, just in case." Clara in hiding. Meanwhile, Clara sat in the shadows of an abandoned storage shed on the edge of town. Her plan had failed spectacularly, and now she was more desperate than ever. She could feel the walls closing in, the weight of her choices bearing down on her. Her hands trembled as she lit a cigarette, the flame briefly illuminating her face. The calm, calculated Clara was gone, replaced by someone raw and frayed at the edges. She couldn't stay in Clearwater much longer. The police were too close, and the boy, Benji, was more resourceful than she had anticipated. Her mind raced with options. She could try to leave town tonight, slipping through the cracks before the police caught up. Or she could gamble on one last desperate move to silence Benji once and for all. Her instincts told her to run, but her pride whispered otherwise. She had come this far. Could she really let it all fall apart now? Clara leaned back against the cold metal wall, her thoughts a whirlwind. She had no money, no allies, and only a vague plan to rely on. But she wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. The town rallies around Benji. By the evening, the story of Clara's intrusion at the school had spread throughout Clearwater. The small town rallied around Benji and his family, offering words of support and promises to help in any way they could. The mayor stopped by their house to thank Benji for his bravery. Neighbors brought food and blankets, a show of solidarity in the face of danger. Despite the gestures, Benji felt uneasy. The more attention the story received, the more exposed he felt. Jonah visited that evening, bringing over a stack of comic books to distract his friend. The two boys sat on the living room floor, flipping through the colorful pages in silence. "Do you think they'll catch her soon?" Jonah asked, breaking the quiet. "They have to," Benji replied, though he didn't sound convinced. "She's out there somewhere, and she knows where I go to school. What if she comes back?" Jonah frowned. "Then the cops will stop her. My dad says they've got checkpoints up everywhere." Benji nodded, trying to take comfort in the thought. But deep down, he knew Clara wasn't the kind of person to give up easily. A dangerous revelation. Later that night, while Benji was brushing his teeth, Lisa received a phone call from Detective Morales. The news made her blood run cold. "We've traced Clara to a storage area on the outskirts of town," Morales said. "We found evidence that she's been staying there. Footprints, cigarette butts, and discarded wrappers. But she's gone now." Lisa gripped the phone tightly. "Do you know where she went?" "Not yet," Morales admitted. "But we believe she's still in Clearwater. She doesn't have the resources to leave town. I just wanted to warn you to stay vigilant. Keep your doors locked, and don't let Benji out of your sight." Lisa thanked her and hung up, her heart pounding. She double-checked the locks on every door and window in the house, her eyes darting to the shadows outside. The officer stationed in a patrol car at the curb gave her a small wave, a silent reassurance that they were watching. But Lisa couldn't shake the feeling that Clara was closer than anyone realized. Clara's final move. At midnight, the Carter household was quiet. Benji was asleep in his room, his small form curled up under the blankets. Lisa sat on the couch in the living room, fighting off exhaustion as she kept watch. Outside, Clara crouched behind a row of bushes, her eyes fixed on the house. She had been watching for hours, studying the patrol car and waiting for the right moment. The officer inside seemed distracted, his head bent over a tablet. Clara's chance was coming. She slipped a crowbar from her bag, her hand shaking as she gripped it tightly. This was it, her last chance to tie up loose ends and disappear for good. She couldn't afford to fail again. Taking a deep breath, Clara moved toward the house, her steps silent as a predator in the night. A battle for survival. Lisa's eyes shot open at the faint sound of a floorboard creaking. She sat up, her senses on high alert. The house was dark, the only light coming from the street lamp outside. She reached for her phone, her fingers dialing Detective Morales' number. Before she could press call, the shadowy figure of Clara appeared in the doorway. "Don't scream," Clara said, her voice low and menacing. "I just want to talk." Lisa's heart raced as she stood, placing herself between Clara and the hallway that led to Benji's room. "Get out of my house," she said firmly, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. Clara stepped closer, the crowbar glinting faintly in the dim light. "I don't want to hurt you, but I will if I have to. Where's the boy?" Lisa's jaw tightened. "You're not getting anywhere near him." The sound of the officer's patrol car door slamming outside broke the tense silence. Clara cursed under her breath, realizing her time was up. She lunged toward Lisa, swinging the crowbar in desperation. Lisa dodged, grabbing a heavy vase from the coffee table and throwing it with all her strength. It shattered against Clara's arm, making her drop the crowbar with a clatter. The front door burst open, and the officer rushed in, gun drawn. "Freeze," he shouted. Clara hesitated for a split second, then bolted toward the back door. But as she reached it, she found herself face to face with Detective Morales and two more officers. "It's over, Clara," Morales said, her voice calm but firm. "You're surrounded." Clara's shoulders sagged, the fight draining out of her. She dropped to her knees, her hands raised in surrender. The officers moved in, cuffing her as Lisa leaned against the wall, trembling but unharmed. Benji's relief. The commotion woke Benji, who ran into the living room to find his mother surrounded by officers. When he saw Clara being led away in handcuffs, he froze, his small frame shaking. Lisa knelt down, pulling him into a tight hug. "It's over, Benji. She's gone." Tears streamed down his face as he clung to his mother, the weight of the past few days finally lifting. For the first time in what felt like forever, he felt safe. And for the first time, he allowed himself to believe that everything was going to be okay. Healing the scars. The morning after Clara's capture was quiet in the Carter household. The faint glow of dawn filtered through the windows, casting soft light on a home still recovering from the chaos of the night before. Lisa Carter sat at the kitchen table with a steaming cup of coffee, her gaze fixed on the front door, as if she expected something else to go wrong. But for the first time in days, the house was calm. Benji woke slowly, the weight of exhaustion still heavy on him. He shuffled into the kitchen, rubbing his eyes. When Lisa saw him, she rose from her chair and enveloped him in a warm hug. "How are you feeling?" she asked gently, pulling back to study his face. Benji shrugged, his small shoulders rising and falling. "Tired," he admitted, "but I feel better. She's gone, right? She can't hurt us anymore." Lisa nodded firmly. "She's gone, Benji. The police have her in custody. It's over." But they both knew that while Clara was physically out of their lives, the emotional scars she'd left behind wouldn't fade so easily. The aftermath of Clara's capture. Across town, Detective Elena Morales sat in her office, sifting through paperwork on Clara's case. The evidence against Clara was damning. Financial records showing years of embezzlement, witness testimonies from both Samuel Prescott and Benji, and now the attempted break-in at the Carter house. Morales leaned back in her chair, letting out a long sigh. It was a clean case, but it didn't sit right with her. Clara's desperation, the reckless choices she made. They spoke of someone who had been pushed to the brink. Morales couldn't condone Clara's actions, but she couldn't ignore the circumstances that had led her down such a dark path. She glanced at a report from Samuel Prescott's hospital interview. His testimony painted a picture of a strained relationship, years of loyalty from Clara, followed by betrayal when she felt undervalued and trapped. The irony wasn't lost on Morales. Samuel's arrogance and control had created the very monster that had almost ended his life. Samuel's redemption. In Clearwater General Hospital, Samuel Prescott sat propped up in a hospital bed, his injuries healing but his pride still bruised. His brush with death had left him reflective in a way he hadn't been in years. The philanthropist who had always prided himself on his generosity now saw the cracks in his legacy. When Benji and Lisa arrived at the hospital that afternoon, Samuel's face softened. He waved them in, his voice carrying a newfound humility. "Benji," he said, his tone warm, "you're the reason I'm sitting here today. I owe you my life." Benji shifted nervously, unsure how to respond. "I just did what I thought was right." Samuel smiled. "That's more than most people would have done. You're braver than men twice your age." Lisa placed a hand on Benji's shoulder. "He's a good kid," she said proudly. "But this has been a lot for him." Samuel nodded solemnly. "I can't change what happened, but I can make sure Benji's bravery is recognized." He reached for a folder on his bedside table and handed it to Lisa. "This is for you." Lisa opened the folder, her eyes widening as she read the documents inside. It was a scholarship fund for Benji, ensuring his education would be fully covered through college. "Mr. Prescott, this is..." Lisa started, but Samuel raised a hand to stop her. "It's the least I can do," he said firmly. "Benji saved me, and I want to help him achieve whatever he dreams of." Benji looked up at his mom, his face lighting up with a mixture of surprise and gratitude. "Really?" Lisa nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "Really, sweetheart?" Confronting the trauma. Despite the relief of Clara's capture and Samuel's gratitude, Benji struggled with lingering fear. At night, he would wake from vivid dreams of the bridge. Clara's cold smile etched into his memory. Lisa noticed his restlessness and decided it was time to seek help. One afternoon, they visited Dr. Maria Keller, a child psychologist who specialized in trauma. Her office was warm and inviting, filled with soft chairs and shelves lined with colorful books. As Benji sat across from Dr. Keller, he felt nervous but safe. She smiled kindly, encouraging him to share his feelings. "I keep thinking about her," Benji admitted, his voice small. "Even though she's gone, I feel like she's still out there." "That's a normal feeling after something scary like this," Dr. Keller said gently. "Your brain is trying to protect you by keeping you on high alert, but we can work on helping you feel safe again." Through their sessions, Benji learned techniques to cope with his anxiety: deep breathing, visualization, and focusing on the things he could control. Over time, he began to sleep more peacefully, the nightmares fading into the background. A community united. The town of Clearwater rallied around the Carters in the weeks that followed. Neighbors organized a fundraiser for the local police department to thank them for their swift action. The mayor held a ceremony honoring Benji's bravery, presenting him with a medal and a framed certificate. Benji stood on the stage at Town Hall, his cheeks flushed with pride as the crowd cheered for him. Jonah hollered the loudest, pumping his fist in the air. "You're a hero, Benji," Jonah shouted, his voice echoing through the hall. As Benji looked out at the sea of smiling faces, he felt a warmth he hadn't known in weeks. The fear and doubt that had plagued him began to lift, replaced by a quiet sense of pride. He wasn't just a scared kid anymore. He was someone who had made a difference. A new chapter. Months later, life in Clearwater returned to normal. Benji went back to his routine of school, hanging out with Jonah, and sketching by the river, but he carried the lessons of his experience with him. One sunny afternoon, as he sat on his favorite rock by the riverbank, he noticed Samuel Prescott walking along the bridge above. The older man paused, looking down at the water where his life had nearly ended. Then he spotted Benji and waved. Benji waved back, a small smile tugging at his lips. The river, once a place of fear and chaos, had become a symbol of resilience and new beginnings. As he opened his sketchpad and began to draw, Benji realized something important. Bravery wasn't just about the big moments. It was about the small ones too, choosing to face each day with courage, even when the memories lingered. The river flowed on, steady and unchanging, a reminder that life always moves forward. And for Benji, that was enough. A life changed. The days turned into weeks, and the weight of the past began to fade into the background. Benji's life started to regain a sense of normalcy, but the experience left a mark on him. One that couldn't be erased, but could perhaps be transformed into something meaningful. A meeting with Clara. Months later, Detective Morales called Lisa with an unexpected request. Samuel Prescott wanted to arrange a supervised meeting between Benji and Clara. Lisa was hesitant, her protective instincts flaring. But she sat down with Benji to explain the situation. "They've taken Clara to a secure facility," Lisa said gently. "She's admitted to everything and wants to apologize. Samuel thought you might want to hear from her, but it's entirely up to you. You don't have to do this." Benji thought for a long moment. The idea of facing Clara again made his stomach tighten, but a part of him wanted answers. He wanted to understand why she had done what she did, and to close the chapter for good. "I want to go," he said finally, his voice steady. The meeting. The facility was quiet and sterile, with white walls and buzzing fluorescent lights. Benji sat in a chair next to his mom and Detective Morales, his small hands gripping the armrests. Across the table sat Clara, her auburn hair now dull and tied back in a simple ponytail. She looked thinner, her face tired but calm. "Hi, Benji," Clara said softly, her voice devoid of the menace he remembered. "Thank you for coming." Benji nodded, unsure of what to say. He felt a mixture of fear, anger, and curiosity swirling inside him. Clara took a deep breath. "I owe you an apology. What I did, there's no excuse for it. I was desperate and angry, but that doesn't make it right. I hurt people. I hurt you. And I'll have to live with that." Benji looked at her, his small brow furrowed. "Why did you push him? Why did you do all those bad things?" Clara's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "Because I let my fear and pride control me. Samuel, he was difficult to work for, and I felt trapped. But instead of finding a better way, I made terrible choices. And when I felt like my world was falling apart, I thought getting rid of him would solve everything." Benji stared at her, his young mind processing her words. "But you didn't have to hurt him," he said softly. "You didn't have to hurt anyone." Clara nodded, her voice breaking. "You're right, and I'm so sorry." Detective Morales leaned in. "Benji, is there anything else you'd like to say?" Benji thought for a moment, then looked directly at Clara. "I forgive you." Lisa's breath hitched, and Clara's eyes widened in surprise. "You forgive me?" Benji nodded. "You did a bad thing, but maybe now you'll be better. That's what matters, right?" Clara's lips trembled as she blinked back tears. "Thank you," she whispered. "You're braver than I ever was." The Prescott Scholarship. A year later, Samuel Prescott fulfilled his promise to establish the Benji Carter Scholarship Fund. At a ceremony in the town square, Samuel gave a heartfelt speech in front of a crowd of townspeople. "Benji taught me something that night," Samuel said, his voice steady. "He reminded me that real strength isn't about power or wealth. It's about courage, compassion, and doing what's right, even when it's hard. This scholarship is a small way to honor his bravery and ensure that other kids in Clearwater have the chance to make a difference in the world." As the crowd erupted into applause, Benji stood beside Samuel, a shy smile on his face. Jonah cheered the loudest, shouting, "That's my best friend." Moving forward, the events of that year became part of Clearwater's lore, a story told and retold as a reminder of what courage looked like. Benji grew stronger from the experience, his fear replaced by a quiet confidence. He still visited the river, sitting on his favorite rock with his sketchpad, but now it was a place of peace rather than fear. Samuel became a changed man as well. He softened in his later years, using his wealth and influence to make real, meaningful change in the community. And though his past mistakes haunted him, he used them as a lesson to be better. Clara, serving her sentence, wrote to Benji from time to time. She described how his forgiveness had inspired her to take responsibility for her actions and strive to become a better person, even behind bars. The final evening by the river. One golden evening, Benji sat by the riverbank with Jonah, skipping stones across the water. The sunlight danced on the surface, and the gentle rustle of reeds filled the air. "You ever think about that night?" Jonah asked, watching his stones sink into the water. "Sometimes," Benji admitted, "but not in a bad way anymore. It's just part of my story now." Jonah grinned. "Well, you've got a way cooler story than anyone else I know." Benji chuckled, tossing another stone. As it skipped across the water, he felt a sense of closure wash over him. The river flowed on, carrying the memories of that fateful night, but also the promise of brighter days ahead. And as the sun dipped low over Clearwater, Benji Carter knew one thing for certain. He wasn't just the boy who had saved a man's life. He was the boy who had chosen to face fear with courage, and in doing so, had changed lives, including his own.